All right, now our next guy. I don't know how many TikTokers or YouTubers are in the. I'm sure maybe a younger generation that it is, and an older generation's not totally. But if you spend much time on TikTok or YouTube or watch a lot of podcasts, um, you'll definitely probably recognize Dr. Kurt Livesay. He's gonna definitely. I mean, we're kind of a quiet bunch right now, but he's gonna definitely. He's got a lot of personality and he's pretty upbeat, so it's gonna be kind of exciting to hear what he has to say. Um, he he has a product that goes along with the HydroPrime product, and it's a silica, and he'll kind of talk about that. But he's also just going to talk general agronomy and kind of he really likes to kind of question the status quo and things like that. So I'm really excited that he took the time to come all the way up here and chat with us. So we'll have him, and then we'll finish with Mickey at the end there. So Kurt, take her away.
Thank you, Cody. Appreciate it. All right. Make sure we got the clicker working. Yes, we do. All right. Okay, first of all, thank you guys for coming out today. Appreciate y'all being here. I'm going to test this out a little bit. Is this going to give me any feedback if I get too far into the mic? No, or under the, okay. All righty, so our company, as Cody said, is called Alchemy Bioscience. My wife is way smarter than I am, and she came up with our tagline, which is crafted by science to work like magic. Because guys, I'm really not that smart. All I've really ever done is commercialize peer-reviewed science, and that's why we see consistency in our products, because I'm biased towards figuring out what the science says first and then going from there. In case you hadn't figured this out already, that's me. I'm a little bit of the black sheep in the group, and that's true no matter what room I'm in, it seems like. So let's talk a little bit about my background. I grew up on a farm in southeast Iowa in the 80s. How many of you lived through agriculture in the 80s? Not a good time to be on the farm, right? In fact, it feels a little bit similar right now. But it was an interesting time to be on a farm. Corn, soybean, cattle. Dad lost everything except the ground itself. And I don't share this story very often, I don't know why now, but ADHD, which we'll get to in just a second. But to the point where we had a heifer that was so tame I could ride her, never named her, it was just number 19. And Dad was like, no matter what happens, like, we'll never, ever sell that calf or that cow. And I came home from school one day and she was gone. So I mean, like, when I say we lost everything, like, we lost it all except the ground, put that in CRP. God bless him, he's worked really hard. He's got back into row crops, back into cattle. In fact, if you are on social media, you probably follow A Better Way to Farm. That is my dad. So and now this is where things get fun, because now I have to address the elephant in the room, which is like, if any of you are in a farming background and you either work with your dad or your kids, you know that you don't always see eye to eye, right? Sometimes we butt heads. Okay. Dad and I get along great, but we don't always agree on everything agronomically, which makes things always fun and interesting. But anyway, so I grew up on a farm. Went off to school because I didn't see much future in agriculture, so went off and did my undergrad at Wheaton College. It's a small Christian liberal arts school up by Chicago. I did my master's at Illinois State University, which is where I met my wife, and then my PhD at the University of Iowa. And so I have what I tell everybody, I have the coolest job in the entire world. I get to travel all over and see how agriculture is done, and then learn and take what I'm learning in these different areas and share it. So from 2018 to 2022, I was actually a licensed commercial pesticide consultant through WSDA. I lived out in Washington State for 5 years. For 10 years, I was a certified crop advisor, and then I just got tired of paying that tax, because that's really what that is, right? That annual fee. So I'm not a CCA anymore, but I was. But I really do get to travel all over, and so this is the Pioneer Research Farm in Hawaii. And like, I know y'all don't grow corn here, but this is the corn that you see there is not like the corn that we grow in the Midwest, right? Like, this is a lot closer to what the original was, which is called like teosinte. But this is how they do seed corn in Hawaii. This is cotton down in Texas. And I don't know if you remember that song from when we were kids. It's like, jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. I had never seen a bale of cotton. That's a big freaking bale, okay? So, like, I just get to see how agriculture is done differently. This is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. This is a rice farm in Arkansas. So this has all been leveled off. Can anybody take a stab as to what that really high elevation thing is in the middle there? Any guesses? It's a hill, but why is yes? I like you, smart ass. All right, so... Any guesses why there's a hill there? That's a cemetery. So this has been leveled to the point where, like, the cemetery is literally above ground. Like, they will dig down to that clay layer so that they can irrigate that. They have a kind of a different water problem than y'all have out here, right? Or so you might think. We'll talk about that shortly. This is sugar beets up in Minnesota. This is giant pumpkins I've worked on in Minnesota. Garbs and canola in Winchester, Idaho. So I do get around quite a little bit. I'm by no means an expert on all of these crops, but again, with ADHD, the next crop is always the most exciting one. This is taken near Colfax, Washington. I don't know if any of you know John Ashelman or not, but you get up into the Palouse, it gets pretty dry, feels pretty dry. But John wins a free trip every year to the Commodity Classic because he grows corn down in the valleys, and they get just enough rain down into those valleys where he can grow like 40 to 90 bushel corn, and since he's the only guy entering in non-irrigated, he wins every year. So it's super cool, right? It's like you get to experience different things. I had never experienced the self-leveling combines until I was out there here a few years ago. I don't know if any of y'all deal with that or not, but I am not man enough to be in a self-leveling combine. That was just not my jam. So now, here's the fun part. I'm going to get to a few disclaimers today. Normally, when I do this part, this is going to contain opinions that will definitely offend you. Normally, the most wild or offensive thing that I'm going to say is that like big ag is a conspiracy, specifically big fertilizer, that they've been scamming you forever, and it's all part of like kind of a big conspiracy, right? Normally, I said. Today, the most wildly offensive and shocking thing I'm going to say is that you have too much water. I know you can just let the collective gasp out. That's like the clickbait version, okay? Like I will clarify and nuance and actually give you evidence to show you exactly what I mean there. But my point in saying this is this, guys. If you agree with everything that I say today, you walk away like feeling really good about it, then I haven't done a very good job. Because I feel like my goal is always to learn and share the truth as best I know it and to educate. So hopefully you walk away with like just one idea, one thought, one thing that you go home and wrestle with that you can take to your operation and somehow make it better. So that's the disclaimer on that. Secondly, the average human being thinks between 400 and 800 words per minute. This has been like scientifically validated. The typical speaker, and this is not just in ag, this is everywhere, speaks between somewhere between 125 and 175 words per minute, which means that even if you don't have ADHD, like my son and I absolutely do, we were diagnosed here a few years ago, that like it can be kind of hard to follow along. That doesn't mean people are bad or less talented or whatever. It just means that like our brains are wired a little bit differently. One of the hallmarks of ADHD that you've probably figured out that I have is called pressured speech. And though normally people are like, they would say that you're like talking faster than your brain, or like my wife would be like, you should think before you speak. I have the exact opposite problem. My brain moves so quickly that my mouth can't keep up with it, so sometimes I stumble over my word. And for the record, this has medicated me. Like the half-life of the meds that I'm on is like, I'm not joking, right? It's not a stimulant, which is why I do self-medicate with coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, okay? But I've actually done those tests, like on where you can do the reading test. I can read and speak at like 600 words per minute. So this is toning it down just a little bit. But all this is to say, you've probably figured out by now why they always put me after lunch. Everywhere I go, they're like, okay, this is the guy that's going on right after lunch, because the odds are good you won't fall asleep. And actually, and this is a true story, when I was back at the University of Iowa and at Illinois State, I taught, and every semester, my students would give the exact same feedback. They're like, dude, we love the class, super interesting, super awesome, for the love of God, slow down. I'm like, sorry, I can't. I get a little wound up about it. I get excited about what I get to talk about. All this is to say, buckle up and we're going to have some fun today, hopefully, all right? So my topic of conversation today is putting the why in agronomy. I should also tell you this, again, bunny trail. I do have 120 slides that we're going to cover in an hour, but have no fear, we're already through 20, by the way. This is slide number 20, okay? So we move at a pretty good clip in case you hadn't figured that out. All right. So putting the why back in agronomy. Guys, sometimes we do things in agriculture for a good reason, and sometimes we do things because that's how we've been doing things. And so I want to challenge you today to think about why are we doing some of the things that we're doing. Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. And the two questions I really want to focus on today are, why don't we focus more on stress mitigation? And then secondly, why should we focus on stress mitigation? And this is where I get to start talking about the conspiracies of big ag and all the fun stuff. How many of you have ever heard of Weaver, Iowa? Anybody ever heard of Weaver, Iowa? One of you. I grew up 45 minutes from Weaver, Iowa, and I'd never heard of it until 3 years ago. It's that small. Probably the reason you've heard of it, and definitely the reason I've heard of it, is because Weaver, Iowa had a little taxpayer incentivized fertilizer plant that was built and then sold off to Koch for $3.6 billion, that's with a B, $3.6 billion. Guys, do the math on this, okay? If you bought every acre of land that touched the Mississippi River on Iowa and Illinois both all the way down, it's not worth $3.6 billion. They're making too much money. That's the problem. This is why you haven't heard or focused on stress mitigation, because the money is in keeping you focused on, I don't know, broadcast fertility. Here's a fun one. This is not like me intentionally stepping on toes. This is just public knowledge. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but Nutrient and Mosaic now being accused of collusion and price fixing when it comes to fertilizer. Yeesh, that's a little bit uncomfortable, right? And we wonder why the prices are so high with what we're doing. And I do want to like temper this just a little bit because somebody's probably here from the co-ops and ready to kill me, and I don't have my bulletproof vest on today, so please don't. Let me finish. It's typically not the local guys that are the problem, right? Let's call a spade a spade. Like this is Nutrien and Mosaic. If anybody is in here, working for those companies, it's not you. It's the corporate level, right? It's the typical deal where it's the corporate level BS. I don't know, how many of you are really excited about the big bailouts where like you're probably not actually gonna see any money, but you got to be the face and the fall guy of the big farm bailout? Do you realize all you are is a conduit to transfer taxpayer money, right? It's transferring money from the US taxpayers to the shareholders of these companies, and you get to be left holding the bag because all the city people are like, oh, blah, 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 farmers making all this, blah, 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 right? No, you just paid off your inputs. The inputs that were price fixed. And if you're not a little pissy about that, hopefully you will be before we're done today. All right, because like fertility, right? Like this is Dr. Fred Beal. I understand this is University of Illinois, but let's just go. I mean, he can be as wrong as any other professor, I suppose, so that's okay. Pick your university. He says fertility is second only to weather in determining yield. And he's right, but I want to challenge you with this. What kind of fertility are we talking about? Forget all this because it's too busy. Just focus on this one little part right here. This comes from the USDA. This is the fertility, this is the average, whatever that means. The average fertilizer budget for 2026 for the US farmer. And of this budget of $473 an acre, $166 of that's gonna go to fertilizer. That is a significant portion of your budget that's gonna go to fertilizer. Is anybody else uncomfortable yet since I'm speaking after Neil and after the Midwestern Bio guys and they were just talking about fertility? It's okay, I get along with them great. I'll bring it home, it's all good. Here's what I want you to think about. What kind of fertility? This has been this data that I'm sharing with you is over 100 years old. So it's not like this is new and groundbreaking. We didn't know this. 105 years ago in Manhattan, Kansas, this was studied. The plant dry matter composition. So if you burn a plant and you go down to the dry matter composition, that's what we're going to see on the left. And then on the right is we're going to compare that to the fertility budget. I hope you all are like getting your uncomfortable shivers out because it's about to get worse, okay? So this is plant dry matter composition. Nitrogen is about 2% of your plant dry matter. And according, you can't see it right here, but this is assuming that we have 100 pounds of MAPRDAP, 100 pounds of potash, and $100 an acre in nitrogen. That's what the bottom of that slide says right there. So that's where that nitrogen number comes from. You may be spending significantly more or less on that depending on where we're at. But according to those numbers, that's 61% of a budget that makes up only 2% of the plant dry matter. Yeesh. Okay, well, let's move on to phosphorus, because it's only 0.5 or 0.5% for plant dry matter, but it's 28% of our budget typically. We get into K, and hey, at least now we're only off by a factor of 10. That's starting to get better, right? We're narrowing that gap. So the plant dry matter composition, 1% K, 11% potassium. And you get down to micros. I had to put in a number here to make it, because it wouldn't let me put 0. So like the plant dry matter composition is actually 1.5% micros and only 0.1% usually of the fertility budget, because most people only spend money on the NP and K, right? So I had to kind of make up that number. And maybe you are spending more on micros. God bless you if you are. That's fantastic. And then finally, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen makes up 95% of the plant dry matter. And I don't know, are you putting carbon out with your stuff? If you're not using something like TerraNu or Neil stuff, you might not be. And honestly, the bigger part of this comes from photosynthesis. So we need to spend a significant time talking about photosynthesis one, I would think. And we will, don't worry. All right, so let's talk about this. And they didn't know this was coming, by the way. I did this last night. So this is Midwestern Bioag, and they're different versions of TerraNu. Notice, guys, carbon 15%, carbon 15%, carbon 15%, carbon 30%. If you're not putting carbon out with your fertilizer, right? Mushroom compost, dairy manure, if you're not putting carbon out with your fertilizer, you are missing out on an opportunity. A big time opportunity, especially in the soils that we have around here. I try very hard to tailor my presentations to the local environment where I'm at, because I believe that agronomy should be regional, and not just a regional like, you know, the Great Plains versus like the Midwest versus the Southeast, but like as specific as possible. So you can ask Cody wherever Cody went back there. I literally was working on my presentation while Brooks and Neil were speaking today, because I was like trying to really dial it in and tailor it, and I added this late last night. Because carbon is just that important. We need to be adding carbon to the soil. Now, when it comes to straight phosphorus, this is Dr. Antonio Malorino. This is from 2023. So again, this is relatively new updates. And they said, look, when you think about a soil test, and we're updating phosphorus and potassium recommendations here, what does that soil test tell you? Because everybody thinks that what that actually tells you is like, how much do we have in our soil, right? Too much, too little, usually it's too little, or at least that's what the fertilizer companies want you to believe. No, what this actually tells you is your likelihood, probability of response by category. And if you have very low on your ratings, according to Iowa State, you have about a 90% chance of getting an ROI on the fertilizer you put out. Hey guys, out of curiosity, in a crappy commodity market, how many of you really would be interested in an ROI this year? Anybody? You're either asleep or you're full of crap or you're lying, right? Because like the price is like, we're not excited about this right now. 90% if you're very low. But guys, if you go down to low, if your phos levels are low and you put on phos, it's a 50% chance of ROI. It's a coin flip. Why are you investing in a terrible year in a coin flip at best? And God forbid you have optimal or high, because it's never going to pay. It just ain't going to happen. Well, I think the reason why we are doing this then, I can tell you why. It's not that I think, I know why we're doing this. It's because we are constantly being fed one of the worst lies in agriculture. Constantly, right? And again, this, and I mean what I said, like it really is a conspiracy by not big ag in general, but big fertilizer specifically. And that's this: mining your soils. You're gonna mine, if you don't put P and K out, you're gonna mine your soils. Let's talk about that. Let's explore this. You know, in that statement and that sentence, mining your soils, there's a verb. The verb in that sentence is mining, right? It's an action, we're mining. Well, what else are we mining? The mines. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, if you apply the logic to your cornfields, your wheat fields, your chickpea fields, your soybean fields, you have to apply the same logic to the mines. And this is not me talking, this is Marshner. Anybody ever read Marshner's Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants? It's like the agronomy Bible. And on page 154 in Marshner, he says, we have 50 to 100 years of phosphorus left in the mines, depending upon how we keep using it, if we keep going through at the rates we're going through it right now. And then he goes on to say, what we are doing right now is not sustainable. You want to talk about regenerative or sustainable? You got to do something like manure or mushrooms. We have to have something that is a renewable resource. Manure is a renewable resource. One of the biggest problems we face in agriculture, and I don't care if we're in Iowa or in Montana or in Washington State or Minnesota or Florida, we have divorced row crop production from livestock production. This is where I can start stepping on. So I called Cody on my way up here yesterday. I said, Cody, I got some dumb questions for you. First of all, why is that fort down there on the low ground and not built up on the hill? Can anybody answer that out of curiosity? Because I always thought like basic war tactics was you wanted the high ground, so I didn't understand that one. Secondly, I didn't understand the 30 miles of rail car frames sitting there. And then fourthly, I said, why are there no cattle? I don't get it. Like, this is an area where I would think grazing would work, right? Like, it seems like it would. I'm sure there's reasons. The beautiful part is I'm not playing ignorant. I genuinely don't know. So I can just be like, hey, why not, right? And there may be a very good reason. But we have got to work on a sustainable, which is to say a renewable approach to what we're doing. Because otherwise, if you're worried about mining your fields, you also need to be worried about mining the soils. And if you're not the one paying the piper, it'll be your kids or your grandkids. And if you don't care about that, you're just not a very good person. I'm sorry, I'm gonna call it like it is. I care very deeply about the world I'm leaving my kids. Very deeply, right? So we need to pay attention to this idea of mining the soils. But here's the thing we gotta also remember, and this is Dr. Elaine Ingham. I used to serve on the PNDSA, which is the Pacific Northwest Direct Seed Association Board. You guys call it no-till or direct seed here? No-till. Okay, I don't know why they make up such a long word for it. Where I'm from, it's no-till, right? So I was on the PNDSA board. We had this meeting, and Elaine and I were sitting at a table, and we were talking about removal. And she said this to me. She said, Kurt, until we run out of the parent material, the bedrock, the limestone, and so on, we won't use up all the nutrients in our soils. Because what those soil tests actually tell us, right, is how much is like becoming available. It's the cycling, it's the biology. You've heard Neil and Brooks and everybody talk about this. That soil test is an indicator of what the biology is actually doing or making available. And when we keep throwing out high salt fertilizers, you've heard low salt a couple times, when we keep throwing out high salt fertilizers, we smoke that biology and we turn our soil into a heroin addict. Because the biology is not there to do the work anymore, so guess what does have to do the work? More chemistry. And the more chemistry we put on, the more we kill the biology. And the more we kill the biology, the more dependent we are on the chemistry, right? So it's a problem. So let's talk about removal rates a little bit, because I get pretty wound up about this. I get pretty wound up about a few things, in case you hadn't figured that out. So this comes from the Potash and Phosphate Institute, so I'm sure there's no bias in that. They're not trying to sell you anything or whatever, right? Okay. You can just ignore most of this except the highlighted part, but they're talking about a corn bean rotation, and the whole point is removal rates. So they say if you grow corn bean rotation for like 7 years and you don't put out fertilizer, here's what you're gonna remove: this many pounds of P2O5 and K2O, and then here's let's just make this easy, because I did a summary slide right here. So what they're saying is, what you're gonna remove from the soil with 7 years and no fertility applied whatsoever is you're actually gonna take off in the grain 319 pounds of P2O5, 328 pounds of K2O. What you're gonna remove from the soil test though, well, wait a minute, hold on. If I'm removing this from the soil, shouldn't my soil test show me that too? What's the disconnect here? What's going on? So, I asked Siri about this. And normally, when you ask Siri, like she'll give you this long verbal response. And Siri had never spoken to me in emojis before, but this was Siri's response when I asked her about it. Maybe she was hinting that we need to be using manure. I don't know. Okay, all right. So we know that the math ain't mathin'. So let's talk about removal rates, and let's figure out how we arrive at this magical removal rate thing. So this is the University of Minnesota Extension, and a lot of different universities have done this. University of Illinois has done it, Minnesota's done it. But here's what they do. Here's how this data is gathered and the process that they go through for it. They gathered 15,000 samples over 14 years where they basically went to your farm and they got in the grain bin and they took out a scoop of corn in this case, and then they sent it off to the lab and they analyzed it. Oh, that's all well and good. And then Dr. Dan Kaiser, who I'm going to be honest, I try not to rip on the universities too hard. It is a pretty easy thing to do. That was kind of a joke. You could laugh at that, but it's also sadly true. I did this interview with him where I was like, hey, we're going to talk about removal rates, and you're going to tell us that it's important that the farmer, use their own data. And we did this interview, and he was like, I think the averages are good enough. And I'm like, and this is why I have nothing to do with the universities anymore, because that's so wrong. It's so stupid. But he did say this one thing that was right. We tend to treat the removal rates or the removal values as an exact value when it's a range. Well, what does that mean? That means that when they gather all of these data points, and they map them out, here's what happens. So again, this is corn, but we'll do this, we can talk about this with wheat. So the average, let's go right here to the middle, the average is somewhere around 0.28, 0.3 pounds of phosphorus or P2O5 removed per bushel produced. I don't know, how many of you are excited to be average? Anybody in here really stoked in 2026, give me that average yield? Nobody? Then why are all of our tests based on the average? Whether it's tissue tests, whether it's soil samples, do you understand that's how that's done? That your range is the range of every sample that they have. That's what's deficient. That's what's sufficient. That's what's low, whatever. I don't care about the average. Here's what I want to know about. I want to know about if I'm working with the farmers I work with, they want to know, wait, how did we get out here? How do I only have to, if I want to put on removal rates, how do I put on or achieve half the removal rate as the guy who's average? Or on the other hand, if you're talking about a nutrient density, because all this is, guys, this really is nutrient density. That's what this translates into. But if I want to talk about nutrient density, how do I make my nutrient or my grain twice as nutrient dense as the average? I care very deeply about both of these outliers and not hardly at all for what's in the average. But here's the takeaway, guys. Here's the takeaway. All I'm telling you to do right now is stop relying on big data sets and understand that you are not an average. You and your farm and every sample you send is an individual data point which helps contribute to this average. And if you are here or here or here, it matters. It makes a huge difference. We got to stop relying on the averages. I want to know about the wings, and I want to know about your individual results. We can do the same thing with K. Again, it's the exact same slide with just different numbers, right? So there's the average, there's the outliers, and that's ultimately what's important. Well, here's what gets fascinating, because if the removal rate, quote unquote removal rate, was a thing, we would expect that all these universities and all their money and all of your money, taxpayer money that's going to them, would come up with some true known value, right? Ooh, spoiler alert, that's not the way it works. So here's what Mizzou says for corn. They said it's 0.45 pounds of phos and 0.3 pounds of potassium. Nebraska at Lincoln, 0.38 and 0.27. Ag PhD, God bless them, private industry, at least they're starting to get a little bit lower. And then sorry, I choked. I vomited in my mouth when I said the Ohio State. I'm a Hawkeye, by the way, okay? So go Hawks. So I'm just going to say Ohio State from now on because that drives me crazy. So Ohio State, 0.35 and 0.2. By the way, the Nebraska recommendations, and you might want to check your local ones, the Nebraska recommendations, those are based on this source right here from 1997. Wait, what did Neil say? Have the hybrids changed any in the last 30 years? Why are we going with removal rates on hybrids that were 30 years, we don't even exist anymore? And again, we can do the same thing with wheat, with chickpeas, with anything. It doesn't have to be with corn and beans. This is just the land I've been playing in. We do have a little bit of data on wheat, by the way, from Ohio State, because here's what's fascinating. We talk about over time. So this is not just me spouting off or telling you to embrace this on a theoretical level. This has actually been studied and proven. So corn from 95, they looked at the 95 hybrids up through compared to the 2019 hybrids, 5% decrease in P2O5 removal on average on those hybrids. Okay, to a 26% decrease. Let me tell you what that translates into. This number up here means that that's a 5% savings on your fertilizer bill. Assuming you want to put out broadcast rates or removal rates, this one right here is a 20. Anybody want to save 26% on fertilizer this year? Anybody? Again, you're either lying or you're asleep, all right? So How about wheat? Wheat was actually more dramatic. The old varieties versus the new ones. So guys, the downside, let me give you the downside. The downside is we are absolutely, the people that are pushing like the whole regenerative, hippie, organic, all that stuff, they're right? We are producing less nutrient-dense food. No question about it, we are. But on the flip side, that means you could be saving a boatload of money on your fertilizer bill, right? If you're going direct to consumer, I would say maybe we got to figure out on how to raise those levels, which I'm about to tell you how we can do it. And if you are not going direct to consumer and you're just producing a commodity, I'd sure as heck want to figure out how to get on the low end of that. So here's what I propose, right? This is me. That's the black sheep over there. All I propose, guys, is use your own data. It's an $18, not an acre. It's an $18 period, $18 test through, I use Waters Ag Labs. So you can find a local lab to do it, I'm sure. I use Waters Ag Labs in Kentucky. And we've been doing this, we can do it with any crop. I've got like 5 data points on winter wheat. So I'm not even gonna show that because it's irrelevant for you, because it's winter wheat out of Kansas. But I have almost 200 data points on corn, and we're starting to build the soybean database, and I would love to work with you on all this. Like I said, I'm not charging for it. You send it straight to the lab, and if you use the submittal form that I send you, they just carbon copy me on it, and then I put it in the database, and we can talk about it. Because then, groundbreaking, revolutionary idea, use your data. Wow, right? Mind blown. That's all I'm saying. Use your data to base your fertilizer decisions on your farm rather than relying on big data, which may or may not have anything to do with what's going on. Let me tell you what we found on corn, because this is where I said, how do we increase that nutrient density? Right here. Use something like TerraNu. Right? I'm not affiliated with MBA, by the way. Like, I'm completely independent. I'll tell you, like, they are distributors for my product that we'll get to at the end. But like, I don't have a dog in this hunt, right? This is just me telling you what the data says. The data says when we use manure, our nutrient density goes up. Now, there's a very astute critic in the room, I hope, who's going, wait, what about yield? That's a confounding variable, right? Because if you have high yielding crops that you've used commercial fertilizer on, which is typically what we see, I'll own that, right? In my data set, it was organically grown in Nebraska, most of the manure data that I have. Okay, so it was lower yielding. They had some weed problems. So you can say, well, that proves it out. You're just diluting out the NP and K in these non-manure sources. Fun fact, ran this through AI, did the data analysis, and I controlled for yield. So this is after controlling for yield. So this is yield assuming at the exact same level, we get more nitrogen, we get more phos, more potassium, more magnesium, and more sulfur when we have a manured field than when we have a non-manured field. And here's where things start to get weird. I did no manure, green manure, which is cover crops and then manure. This is aluminum in pounds of removal. We statistically significantly reduced aluminum uptake. Aluminum is bad, for those of you who don't know, okay? Why that happens, I don't know, maybe because we're pushing too much good stuff in there. But when we use carbon-based fertilizer, think mushroom composts, think dairy-based manure, when we get carbon in there, we change things. And here's what changes. I have a good friend, Danny Gardner, who's all over TikTok right now. He's Mr. Weok is what we call him, right? And to the point where it's annoying maybe some of you in this room. And that's okay, but that means that you probably are at least paying attention to what's going on. And Weok is your water extractable organic carbon. And he talks about how your Weok is essentially the currency with which the plants do business with the bugs. Because we talk about root exudates, right? Like, we gotta have a carbon source out there so that those plants tell the bugs what they need. The bugs go and release the natural, with enzymes and with their biological processes, they release nutrients from the soil, and those get taken up into the plant, and not just into the plant, they get taken up into the grain. So when I talked about that carbon thing earlier, that carbon that makes up the dry matter is largely not this kind of carbon. That comes from photosynthesis, and I will get to photosynthesis in a couple minutes. But what I'm talking about is the carbon-based fertilizers are usually lower salt, right? I think Neil talked about that. So we get a lower salt, which then has less negative impact on the biology and facilitates that relationship better between the biology and your crop that you're growing. And this is true, again, whether it's chickpeas, wheat, corn, cotton, it doesn't matter, right? We need more carbon in the soil to facilitate that interaction and that exchange with the bugs. So hopefully I've convinced you that it's a big conspiracy, right? With that big ag, big fertilizer has a vested interest in keeping you to not focus on stress mitigation because they want to keep selling you fertilizer. Shocker, okay? Well, let's talk about maybe instead, why should we focus on stress mitigation then? And that's right here. The last time I checked, money doesn't grow on trees. I don't know. If any of you has one of these, I would very much like to take a clone or a cutting. I have figs that I'm growing at home right now, and we did cutting of the fig trees. I would like a cutting of your money tree if you have one, please. The reason you should focus on stress mitigation right here, ladies and gentlemen, is ROI. especially in a down commodity market. Everybody's like, oh, I want to do the snake oil and the foo-foo juice and the pixie dust. I own that trademark, by the way, trademark pixie dust. That's funny. You can laugh. Make sure you're awake. All right. I really do, though. So here's the thing. Everybody wants to try those when the prices are high. That's not the time to try those. You try those when the prices suck, when commodity prices are bad. Because if it pays when the commodity prices are bad, you know what's going to happen when they're good? That's when you make a windfall, right? So right now, we need to be looking like, look, if it pays when the commodity prices are bad, it's sure going to pay when they're good. Absolutely. So let me let you in on this dirty little secret that big fertilizer doesn't want you to know, and that's right here. There is no product on the market, not Neil's, not Brooks, not mine, nothing that can actually increase your yield, right? Brandon hinted at this. All we can do is decrease yield loss, and I can prove that to you with this. Everything that we do is an insurance policy against stress, a specific kind of stressor. If you go out and you buy hail insurance and it doesn't hail, do you get paid? I don't know, unless something's different up here. It's not how it works in the Midwest. Let's assume for a second that you had a field that was weed-free, complete, and I'm not talking like, oh, weeds are this tall. No, this is a thought experiment, okay? You had a field that is completely weed-free, no weeds whatsoever, and you go out and you spray a herbicide, you gonna get a yield bump? In the Midwest, this is where some smart ass would do the whole, well, dicamba on soybeans. I'm like, that's a plant growth regulator, right? Not what we're talking about right now. And I can even explain that in the same framework, okay? But point is no, because what does herbicide do? Herbicide kills the weeds, and the weeds compete with your crop for resources. So they are yield robbers. They take yield away. And all a herbicide does is it stops the bleeding. It stops the yield loss. So any product you're ever going to buy is an insurance policy against a specific set of stressors. So like what kinds? Well, that depends, right? Fungal, like fungicides against fungi, herbicides against plants. We've got all these different things. Do you guys deal with any animal pressure up here? I am curious to know about that. You know, whether it's elk or moose or buff, I don't know. What do you have that's like any animal problems? Prairie dogs. Where I grew up in southeast Iowa, and this is true, if you have a field that's less than like 80 acres, it's just a glorified food plot. The stupid deer will eat it all. That's how thick the deer are where I live. And I know down in Georgia, there's a product labeled for corn called Avapel, because the crows will come in and just eat everything. And so it's like a bird repellent. So it's interesting, but all these products, right, even for animals. So every product that we have, whatever that product may be, is an insurance policy against some of these specific set of stressors. So the thing that you got to remember, and really I hope that this will hit home for you, is guys, you can't regain yield late that you lose early. And that's really relevant when we understand how plants grow and how plants function. So I told you earlier, right, here comes that was the clickbait version that you have too much water. Now I'm going to prove to you that you actually do. But at a very specific time and in a very specific place. There's the nuance, okay? Roots do not grow in soil, and we have to understand this. They don't. Roots grow in the pore spaces in between the soil particles. So I got this nifty little video I'm going to show you, and it doesn't matter what kind of seed this is. I don't even know what seed it is. But I want you to watch as this root comes down here, and every time it hits a rock, it's like, oop, and goes sideways. Those rocks represent the soil particles. Anytime that your root hits a soil particle, it's going to go find an empty, open pore space. That's what it does. Roots don't grow in soil. They grow in the pore space in between the soil. Do you know what else competes for that same space where that oxygen is right now? Water. At dissolved oxygen concentration, 1/2 of saturation, root respiration and function start to decline. That's a really fancy, sexy, scientific way of just saying that when we get water, too much water, we have a lot of problems. Okay, so we all, I think, have an idea of saturation, right? You got water running off. You're like, I have never seen that before. That's okay. That's all right. Stay with me. Field capacity is where we have water available for the plants. So like we're basically full of water. And then we have between field capacity and wilting. I'm speaking down at a CropX irrigation meeting tomorrow in Omaha. They had me do one of these in Indianapolis here a couple weeks ago. And it's all about moisture sensors, right? How much is too much, how much is too little, etc. And this is like where they live, right here, between field capacity and wilting. But the thing that we learned in the Midwest back in 2021, we're like, oh my God, we've got a drought, except that we had a bumper crop. Because when you get the water and how much water you get at one time matters. It absolutely matters. We all know about the wilting point. Some of you probably seen this. I hope not, but I'm sure you have up here, right? This is where no more water available to the plants and we have problems. We start to come into big problems there. But what this is saying right here, there we go, is that when we get dissolved oxygen, half of the saturation point. Well, wait a minute. Saturation point's here, and this is between, like, field capacity seems like it'd be great, doesn't it? We'd have plenty of water there. No, because we've snuffed out the oxygen. And you're like, oh, that's corn. I know, I show you this for the visual, okay? This is a study that was done back in 2013. So you've got the 1 day of flooding, no flooding, 3 versus 7. And I want you to pay attention to what a dramatic visual difference there is here. When we have too much water early, we essentially tell that plant, you are in a really crappy environment. And that plant immediately goes, and it pulls back. And that is important when you understand the when of waterlogging and why this is important. This study was published back in 2016. So this is grain weight per plant. So this is durum wheat as affected by waterlogging at tillering. So this is early. I was actually shocked at how resilient wheat was, the spring wheat was on this. So you got almost 3 weeks before you see a big decline. But if it's from like 3 weeks on, it's like a 37% yield reduction, right? And by yield, I should say yield potential, okay? So let me ask you this. What kind of soil do you have? And this is where it gets really fun because I get to prove this on local data. So different people, like when I travel all over, guys, people are like, oh, we've got this, it's a heavy clay, and I'm looking at it, and it's a CEC of like 3. It's a CEC of 3, but they've got magnesium base saturations of like 26. And I'm like, you don't have a heavy clay, you have excess magnesium, and it makes your soil too tight. Because when you look at the classifications of how this works, this is your soil texture based on like USDA data. So if you're a 1 to 10, you're in a sand. If you're at 10 to 20, it's a coarse loam, fine loam. You get up here into these clays, and that's the issue. So where's Cody? Cody's in the back. Cody, you changed my whole presentation today, right? What am I about to show here? What are these zones 1 through 5? Could you tell them loudly, please, what's going on here? Well, like the 1 through the 5, what do the numbers mean? 5 zones. What's the good and what's the bad? Okay, so we go from worse at 1 to better at 5, right? So Cody was showing me this morning, and I'm being super rude to Brooks and Neil back. I'm like freaking out on my computer. I'm running the numbers on this, and I'm like, wait, something just jumped off the page at me. Just jumped off the page. So I ran these through here. So this is across there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Guys, if you have this on your farm, I would challenge you, please look at this. Maybe this doesn't apply to you. I said agronomy needs to be local. This may be completely different for you. But I'm telling you, based on these farms for Cody, this is what we see right here. The average CEC on the bad was 35. Well, wait a minute, go back. That's a clay. Like, we don't have clay here. Yes, you do. According to the USDA's texture, that's a clay. Well, the slightly less sucky is a 29.9, and then 25, and then 21. Wait a minute. The soil's getting better, right? Guys, as the CEC goes down, the yield goes up. Wait a minute. How does that make sense? If we have a lower CEC, we're going to let that water get away, and we are going to have drought stress. I'm going to talk about drought stress shortly, all right? But here's why you should care on this. Because a wet spring can take your wheat crop from 250, and you're like, we've never seen 250. I know, that's Eric Watson's national or world record down in New Zealand. I get it, okay? 258, I think it was, but I'm bad at math, so I'm going to round for ease. Down by 93 bushels, which is 37%. Guys, here's the timing matters on this, and this is just as corn, yeah, but I'm going to show you wheat next, okay? This is, until about 3 weeks ago, I didn't understand this. Have you heard of source and sink? Has anybody heard of this? Even if you're not you don't wrap your head around it. The source and sink idea is like, when we grow plants, right, the source is where the nutrients in the plant are coming from, and the sink is where they're going to. Sometimes the source is the ground, and the leaf might be the sink. So this changes over the course of the lifestyle, or the course of the life cycle of the plant. But in my brain, I'd always just done this. Whether it was corn or wheat or whatever, I'm like, okay, well, in corn, we have vegetative, and then we have reproductive growth. It's linear, vegetative to reproductive. And in my brain, I'm like, okay, well, then that means that's our source and that's our sink. We're growing the crop. The source is going to be the source that feeds the grain late in that plant's life. Only here's the problem. I was completely wrong about that, right? Because when you look at what determines the number of rows around and what determines when it determines the length of that corn plant or that ear of corn, it's all early. That is when we develop our sink. And late in that plant's life, guys, this is why fungicide pays across the Midwest, because if you get tar spot or gray leaf spot or southern rust or something like that comes in, and it hits that plant late, and you turn that solar panel from dark green to orange, you kill photosynthesis, you kill the source. And those photosynthates are what actually boost the size of those kernels. So let's take it over. We gotta flip our understanding and understanding that we actually build the sink early. And this is why I said it's about telling that plant, we got to trick it and put it in an environment where it's like, hey, this is cool. I'm doing great. Not like, oh my God, I'm going to pull back. Let's talk about what makes up wheat yield, right? You've got the heads per square foot, which is your density, your grains per head, and your grain weight. Now let's do the exact same concept here with wheat. When are we determining the density, right? So that's planting. And then how about grain spread? You are developing your sink early in that plant's life. And if you have too much water, not throughout the whole soil profile, right? If you have those clays and that water is standing there in the root zone, that plant is going, oh my God, I'm not in a good environment. And you pull back, you lose that yield potential right off the bat. And our source is out here late, okay? So let's talk about heat stress, because we got to set that plant up for success early on. But when does heat stress and when does drought stress actually come into play? Well, if this is our sink and our source like we're talking about, this is a study that was published, I think this one was 2020, I don't remember. Oh, it's here, 2013. So this is 2013. This is the impact of drought stress. So they did this for 2 years. Here's what they did. In the drought stress condition, they watered it 2 times in 2012. Here at, do you guys use Zadox or Feeks, by the way, or Feekies? What's the staging that we use up here? Mostly Feeks? Okay. That's my guys in Oklahoma do that too. All the university stuff is in the Zadox, so the growth stage, whatever. So it's like growth stage, they did it like 31, and I think it was 60, maybe 55 was when they did the irrigation. So the drought stress condition only got 2 waterings. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so we got 2 waterings. Notice that the first one was during the sink, and the second one was during this source, or like when we need to be producing photosynthesis. In 2013, they gave it an additional watering. And we see big reductions, right? So this is a even more recent study where guys, a drought level, they had control and then moderate and severe drought stress. You're talking about taking the top end of your wheat yield down by half or down by nearly 3/4 just by having drought stress at the wrong time, by that plant freaking out and going, ugh. So here's what it comes down to, because I'm like a numbers guy in the sense that I like to see the math work out. So if you have a wet spring, let's just say that the yield potential is in the bag for 250, because we know it is, right? That's what Eric Watson's already done. You have that water concentrated in that root zone early on for a little while, and that plant starts to pull back, and it's like, too much water in a heavy clay. And you can reduce your crop yield by 93 bushels an acre. I'm sorry, how much NP and K did you need to make up that 93 bushel reduction? This is why I say that big fertilizer is a conspiracy sometimes. You can't get enough NP and K out there to make up for this. Carbon will help with it, by the way, right? A little more resiliency, a little more plant available, phos, potassium, etc. And then if we have heat and drought from jointing on, you can take off another 115 bushels. So again, here's your visual on this. We start at 258, we take off 37% with a wet spring, we take off another 73%, and all of a sudden, guys, you go from 250 to 42. The difference between a world record wheat crop and an average wheat crop is a little bit too wet in the root zone, not the entire soil, too wet in the root zone for 3 weeks, and heat and drought. And I know that I don't need to convince you on that latter one, right? This is why you need to focus on stress reduction, because you can't get enough NP and K on to make this kind of a difference. And you're not going to mitigate the whole thing, right? You absolutely aren't going to pick up 200 bushels just by going out and spraying some silica on or by putting some carbon out there, but we can start to make differences over time. We've spent 100 years screwing it up. We're not going to fix it overnight. So again, I'm a visual guy. I like this visual right here. So if we started at 250, and we have a wet spring, it goes down. This is our max. The reason I show this, guys, this is our new max yield. When I say you can't regain yield late that you lost early, this is why, like, some unscrupulous fungicide, or chemical rep is going to be like, well, you go put your fungicide out there, you can get some of that back. No, you can't. All you can do is stop the bleeding, right? So if we lost this, we may stop, if there's fungal pressure, we may stop some additional yield loss. That's why I have the question mark here, because it can be lower than that. I've only picked 2 stressors. We didn't talk about weeds. We didn't talk about fungus. I picked 2 stressors and showed you mathematically how we can go from a world record to an average wheat yield, right? So, and not that you're going to have each of these every year, but this is the power of stress and the power of stress reduction. You cannot regain yield late that you lose early. Now, for those of you who didn't know this or hadn't figured this out, I'm a little bit of a mad scientist. And what drives me is solving interesting problems. I really like doing that, okay? So I started our company in my garage. That's my wife. She's got a little thumbs up there. We would put our kids to bed between 7 and 8 o'clock, and we'd go work every night until midnight in our garage. I have built a company out of my garage in Washington State that is now Beck's PFR proven with some, I know it's a company you may not even be familiar with. It's a Midwestern seed company that does a lot with independent research. So my point is we have tons of third-party data. Washington State has studied my product, and we built it out of our garage, okay? We've moved from there. We have a lab and a warehouse, and I'm really proud of this because, like, when you're doing this and you're working with white powders and UPS shows up, you have no idea how many conversations, like, you have no idea how many times I was like, I swear I'm not making meth or coke, or, like, it's not drugs, okay? But, like, this is where we started, and I'm proud that we built it from that to where we are today, all right? So let me tell you a little bit about how I build products for stress mitigation. I always start with silica. You're like, well, why silica? Don't worry, get to that in just a second. And then I look at things like vitamins and amino acids, as Neil pointed out, and then there's some other proprietary stuff. And people say, look, if I was in your shoes, I'd be like, proprietary, I hate that. I do too. Because everybody's got their proprietary secret sauce, and a lot of times it's a bunch of BS. Absolutely is. I'll own that, right? But the issue that we have is, if I tell you everything that's in there, if I patent my formula instead of using a trade secret like Coca-Cola does, then the Nutrients and the Cokes and the Mosaics of the world leverage their buying power and push me out. So there are some proprietary things in there. But here's the fun part. The EPA cares a lot about two different things. I don't know how this is in Canada, Neil. Maybe you can speak to this. But here they care very much about two things: the raw materials that you use and the claims that you make. So if you use a raw material but you don't put it on the label, a lot of companies think that's cool. God, I hope the EPA comes after them. Like, as a small guy who started in my garage, I'm just like, man, go hit those people in the nose, because like, they're cheating, right? They're cheating. They're using pesticide, like plant growth regulators, whatever, and putting it out there and getting this little bump, or getting this little product efficacy bump, because they're using things that they're not allowed to use. I don't like that. Everything that I use in all of my products is EPA approved as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the claims that you make. So I'm going to show you some pictures here in a little bit, and I'm going to make darn sure that I am very crystal clear on this. I'm not making pesticide claims. We're not killing anything. I'm not going to tell you to go out and spray something and don't use a fungicide instead. I'm going to talk about plant health because I can make those claims, right? So I very much care about the claims that we make, and I stay in plant health claims. But I use things like silica, different vitamins, amino acids, etc., all to get to stress mitigation. Now, you're like, what's up with the picture? Well, the picture is this. I'm going to leave here when we're done this evening, and I've got to go back down to Great Falls because I'm catching a plane because I got to go speak in Omaha tomorrow, right? And if the road that I'm going to take is jammed, or there's a crash or whatever, I'm going to have to find another way to get there. I will find another way to the airport tonight. It's going to happen. Mark my words, okay? Because I want to get home and see my family Wednesday. But I might have to take a different route than the one I planned to get there. It's going to cost me time, may cost me money, it's going to cost me energy. And I want to make sure, though, that I have options of getting there. And so for me, like, I usually start with silica, but like sometimes maybe this, for whatever reason, it doesn't work in this environment, or there's something blocking it in this particular pathway, right? Well, that's where we look at one or two or three other things. And I try never to get more than like 3 to 4 modes of action in something, because then otherwise we start having like, a Seattle mess of anybody ever been in Seattle, I-5? When I lived out there, oh my gosh, right? That is a mess. It's the worst. Like, God bless those of you who live out here, because like that is not my world. So you don't want to get too many options, because then you get this crosstalk and you get these things competing with each other. Not a good ideal scenario, right? So I want to have 3 to 4, no more than 3 to 4 modes of action, and I want them all to be about stress mitigation. So that's how I build stuff. Now, why silica? Why do I always start with silica? If you take nothing else from the presentation today, I hope that you burn this into your brain. Silica is a stress mitigator. It's the OG stress mitigator, right? This is God's stress mitigator. It's natural. It's not a hormone. It's not a plant growth regulator. It has all kinds of weird, magical, foo-foo-y dust kinds of things that it does that we don't even fully understand. In science, if you go look, like, just Google silica and like plants, and you will find literally thousands of research studies on this. I told you guys early on, I'm not that smart. I just commercialized peer-reviewed science, right? There is so much data on silica and its powerful impact on plants. You're like, but wait a minute. Oxygen is the number one most abundant element in the Earth's crust, and silica is number 2. Why do we need more silica? Well, I've also showed you, hopefully, convinced you, or at the very least made you think about the fact that you might have a microenvironment in that root zone where, even though oxygen is the most abundant element, you might not have enough of it. And I guarantee you that in the Midwest, that's our number one yield limiting factor year in and year out in our heavy soils that we've got. So just because it's there doesn't mean the plant can get to it, right? And that's exactly what we see. So there's a lot of forms of silicon in the soil. We have silicas and silicates. But the issue is, most of them are not plant available, or I should say this, not plant recoverable, right? So let me drive that point home. There's a difference between available and recoverable. I hope that this picture was not taken on any of your farms. Maybe if you have a neighbor that you don't like, it was taken on their farm. Hopefully, I don't know, I'll stay out of it. But like, this, guys, is plant available iron. That is iron that is available to the plants. It's there, it's available, but it's not in a form that is recoverable by the plant. And that's the key difference. There is a difference between availability and recoverability. Let's talk a little bit about stand establishment, right? This is 2001, this is old research. Tillers can only partially compensate for a low initial wheat population, even when the cultivar has good tillering. So one of the things that I'm starting with is kind of the same place where the Midwestern bioag guys are starting with, and that is, when we're gonna put that seed in the ground, I wanna take care of it, right? So they have their, what's the product, Brooks? What's it called? Hydroprime, that's the one, okay. So Hydroprime, and then they've got another version of this called Hydroprime DS that involves a product I'm gonna talk about next, because remember, it's the third time I've said it, hopefully you'll remember, you cannot regain yield late that you lose early, right? So the product that is paired with that I actually manufacture, we call powder keg. Powder keg is again, labeled as a fertilizer because that's what is legally allowable, and we use fertilizer materials. But it's a blend of nutrients and glycine amino acids. These are boring EPA claims, by the way. Everything I'm about to say is on the label, so that's whatever. Let's get down here to the fun part. Improves plant nutrition, seed conditions for growth. We can actually reduce lodging. You guys have any lodging issues up here or no? Yes, sometimes. Okay, so I'll show you a picture of how we can reduce lodging, which is kind of fun. And I have crop-specific formulations. So like, not all crops are the same. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but corn and cotton and cannabis and canola, they're all different, right? So we have crop-specific formulations for these, and it's very economical. I think it adds $2 to $3 an acre, depending on your planting population, if you go with the de-stress version of their hydroprime versus the regular one. And obviously, the point is to de-stress the plant. So here are some pictures we got. Most of these pictures actually come from Josh Messer or Travis Messer in Western North Dakota. But here, I mean, one of the big things you're going to see, guys, is root mass, right? Like more roots, more prolific root formation. And when we have more roots, we have more surface area in the soil for that plant to take up nutrients late. That's what we're trying to do. Grow that root mass, make that plant healthier. Field peas, anybody here grow field peas? Out of curiosity? Few, maybe, okay. So they ran, I think it was a half rate of the soybean rate, because when I say specific, I'm gonna get as close as I can. I don't have a field pea specific version, but Josh ran I think it was the soybean product on this. And again, look at the difference in rooting. See guys, the problem is too often we wanna do drive-by agronomy, and that means something different in Chicago than it means here, in case you were wondering. There we go, some of you are paying attention, okay? So no, what I mean by that is, you wanna drive by the field at 60 miles an hour and see if there's a visual difference. And sometimes it don't work that way. Because I can put you in situations where you can see a visual difference and not get a yield difference. And last time I checked, unless you're growing silage on corn, right? Like the above ground plant matter doesn't matter nearly as much as what ultimately is produced in the grain. That's what you're paid on, is the grain, right? So sometimes you can see a visual difference and not actually get a yield difference. Believe it or not, the inverse is also true. Sometimes you can get a yield difference without seeing the visual difference. Cody, you told that story earlier, right? About like, boy, that looked crappy versus that looked good. And then there was a big yield difference. So our eyes can deceive us. And a lot of times what happens from the soil surface down tells a more important part of the story than what happens from the soil surface up. I told you we can reduce lodging. This is one of my favorite pictures that I have. This was on, I think it was on barley in North Dakota, if I remember right. Look at the difference in stem diameter. And the difference in the walls. This is the power of silica, guys. So we increased the stem diameter by 50%. And we decreased the length to the first internode by 50%. This was Josh Messer's picture. I just love this because, again, when we can strengthen that plant, silica kind of acts like the mortar in like a bricks and mortar. You know, if you're going to build a brick and mortar, it helps strengthen the cell walls and like the connections between them. You make that plant stronger. One of my favorite things to do back home is if we have a guy that's willing to do it, we'll put like silica on corn versus not, and you walk through the field, you can like bend them over with your hands, and those you can snap off or bend them over, and this one goes and pops back up. It's really cool, but that's what silica does, right? It gets into that plant and helps strengthen those cell walls. So again, we've got data, field peas, soybeans, you know, whatever. That's Travis, and this is North Dakota, Minnesota. This is the one on wheat that I love to share. This is on 7 different strip trials on 3 different fields in McLean County, North Dakota. Excellent ROI on this product. So if you guys were already considering the hydroprime, which you very much should be, I hope to goodness you'll consider adding the de-stress version, right? It's going to cost you another $2 or $3 an acre, still covered, I believe, by that money-back guarantee. So if you have stress, I mean, maybe you don't have stress, so maybe this doesn't apply to you. There's like one person laughing. Okay, you got it. All right, thanks. Let's talk about silica and heat stress. This, and I don't want to just focus on wheat today, right? We're going to talk about the dicots some too. This is tomatoes. I know none of you grow tomatoes. That's fine. Again, dicots are different than monocots, though. This is a normal condition. This is a heat stress condition. What you're going to see here is even in a normal condition, you do sometimes get a little more robust response to that vegetative growth, particularly in dicots. So like we see this in potatoes. I have a ton of potato growers I work with in the Pacific Northwest. And when I show you the data on chickpeas, it's going to flat blow your mind. So notice over here, though, in the heat stress without silica, that plant just wilts. It looks like it's like unhappy because it is. But when we add silica here, one of the cool things that silica does is it helps to close the stomata as well, so we can stop transpiration and we can stop that plant from suffering. You do realize that your plant is a wick or a pump, right? So like if you've ever had a transfer pump and you ran out of source material and you're like cavitating that pump, that's exactly what happens when you have a plant in a scenario where it's dry outside or you got a lot of wind, right? So you have a differential and a moisture gradient. It's dry outside the plant, and that plant is wicking moisture up from the ground. So it's like the water goes in through the plant, up through the plant, out through the stomata, because the air and the inside the plant, it's trying to balance itself. It's called vapor pressure deficit. You should go look that up, VPD. The vapor pressure deficit is trying to balance itself out. So when we add silica, we can actually close those stomata, and we can make that plant have better turgor pressure, or turgidity is the fun word there. And then again, the big difference here, look at the root difference, right? It's all about the roots. We're driving roots. In fact, let's talk a little bit about silica and drought stress. So when I told you I went to Wheaton, small private Christian school, and rather than taking something useful like, Spanish or German, or the way the world's going right now, maybe Russian, that's kind of an unfunny joke. I studied ancient Greek because I was, at Bible college. So I can actually read that. It's photosynthese. And in case you were wondering, that is the root word, or where we get the word for photosynthesis, right? Photo and synthese, photo meaning light, synthese meaning synthesis. And here's what photosynthesis is. It's the process by which chlorophyll containing green cells in plants use the energy of light to make carbohydrates, which is sugar, from carbon dioxide and water. That's a lot of text. I don't put a lot of text on my slides if I can avoid it, so let's simplify. It's when we use the power of the sun, so light energy, and we then utilize water, which we already know y'all are kind of short on sometimes, and we have to have CO2, which, for the record, if you want to do a thought experiment, do you know that additional CO2 up here would make a bigger difference for you guys maybe than anything else? And one of the ways you can get additional CO2 is having manure or carbon in your soil to then gas off to the plant. Like, I could spend literally an entire day. You know all the greenhouse growers, Danica and I were talking about this, the greenhouse growers just north of the border, right? Do you know what they're boosting in those greenhouses all the time? Carbon dioxide. Ambient carbon dioxide out there is about 420 parts per million, which when you work in medical cannabis, and I did some consulting in medical cannabis, that's really easy to remember, 420 parts per million. Some of you are too pure to get that, but that's actually true, okay? So that's true. I'm dead serious about this. But in most controlled environment agriculture, in most greenhouses, they run 12 to 1,500 parts per million, because the additional carbon dioxide will actually help offset heat and drought stress as well. So if you can boost CO2 levels, you can help that photosynthetic process too. Fun fact. But the whole point of what we're trying to do is make sugars. Why? Because sugars are carbon, and carbon is the currency with which the plant does business with the microbes. That's why we need to add more carbon to the soil as well. We can help that out. So you'll remember this slide from a few minutes ago, that real uncomfortable little kick in the that we talked about earlier, right? About how our fertility budget doesn't look anything like the plant's allocation of resources. Well, you know what I left off of that was silica. Where's silica in all that? This research was done 105 years ago. Did we not know that silica existed? No, we did. It's just that nobody has done much with that up until I started to play with it. So here's the actual research study published in the 1920s. Here's the actual breakdown, which is why it has that weird text, because they didn't use Calibre or Arial or Times New Roman, whatever it was. But in the entire plant, silica was present roughly at about the same concentration as nitrogen, right? More than phosphorus, more than potassium. Here's the fun fact, though. It's not in the grain, right? You're pulling off way more NP and K in the grain than you are in the plant itself, because where silica is actually concentrated, guys, it's in the roots, it's in the leaves, and it's in the stems, far more so than NP and K. All this is to say, ladies and gentlemen, silica builds your solar panels. If we want to maximize photosynthesis, we got to have healthy solar panels. That's an AI image. You had no idea how long I had to work with the AI to get that to not look any more stupid than it does. Okay, so there we go. Silica builds your solar panels. Now, very specifically to the region, I want to talk about wheat and I want to talk about chickpeas, and then we'll wrap up. Can you believe that we've gone through almost 120 slides? We still got 6 minutes left. We're going to get there. All right. This is with 0.2 millimolar of silicon in a drought stress, and this is a 0.8. Would you agree that more silica is better than no silica or less silica? Yeah, I think so, right? So this is the product. I told you I trademarked this. I wasn't joking. I own the trademark on Pixie Dust and Pixie Dust Plus. Now, we're about to do a rebrand because, God bless you, I found in agriculture that farmers have this negative association, right? If the local co-op doesn't sell it or the extension agent hasn't been paid buku bucks to study it, then snake oil and foo-foo juice and pixie dust, right? We write it all off. And I was like, hold my beer and watch this. So I trademarked that. And I'm very, very proud of that because I think it's cool marketing. But some of y'all struggle to get over that in your brain. You're like, nope, it's still pixie dust. So we are going to rebrand. Formulation is going to stay the same. We are working on this. But I want you to notice the visual. This is on soybeans, okay? But this is 2 weeks. And we do see some of that above ground difference when we get into dicots. So same thing, we would expect to potentially see a visual difference in chickpeas, probably not in wheat, because in wheat we're going to go in furrow, right? So we get bigger rooting difference, better nodes, bigger plants, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what it comes down to, though. I told you, you got to get an ROI. If the farmer doesn't get an ROI, it doesn't matter. This was one of my very first trials back in Wisconsin. Josh Riley did this with me, and in a very decent yielding environment, he still picked up about 10% on his wheat yield, or on his soybean yield. Guys, this is tons of data that we've got. Again, not relevant because it's soybeans, but it's about a 5-to-1 ROI on the private company data, and that doesn't matter because every company has data. So let's get to the independent third-party data. This is Beck's, this is their PFR, their Practical Farm Research, and they'll tell you that even after product cost, we're still looking at about a 3-to-1 or about a 2-to-1 return after product cost on that. And again, the company data would tell you it's a little higher. Let's talk about chickpeas now real quick. So this is a study that was published in 2013. Silica fertilization had a beneficial effect on water use efficiency. Would any of you who are still awake like to be more efficient with your water use? Right? Silica will help with that. Our results highlight that silica is not only involved in amelioration of growth and in maintaining water status, but it's also an important element for the symbiotic performance of chickpea plants. How big of a difference are we talking about here? Like, let's contextualize this. Does it matter, actually? Well, here's what this study published in, what was that one, 2020? I don't remember. This is the one I think that just came out, 2025. So July of 25, I had to pay for this. And for the record, that grinds my gears. Like my tax dollars paid for the research. Do I really have to pay to go access the research? And the answer is yes. But here's what increased with silica foliar application. Number of pods per plant with silica, up 41%. Number of seeds per pod, up 35%. The overall yield, 40%. And drought-stressed chickpeas. I'm not saying I'm going to get you a 40% yield increase. I'm saying it's probably worth monkeying around with just to see. That's significant. Now, let's talk about real quick back to wheat, and then we're going to wrap it up. So when you look at the photosynthetic capacity, I just remember I talked about water stress early tells that plant to freak out. Drought stress late is problematic because if you've ever seen, like in corn, we call it pineappling, where the plant kind of shrivels up. We minimize photosynthesis when that happens because that plant is stressed out. We want that flag leaf to be nice and open because, right, the upper canopy here is what's responsible for most of the photosynthesis that goes into your grain fill. So this is where I'm going to be very careful not to make a pesticide claim. This is, again, so I'm not talking about my product. I'm talking about Google silica and plant disease. Just Google it. That's all I'm saying, okay? This is a control. This is on blast in rice. I know you don't grow rice, but you're probably familiar with some of these chemistries, okay? So this was the control. You would agree that that's pretty severe disease pressure, and we are absolutely going to cut photosynthesis when we do this, right? Well, what about when we use propiconazole? Makes a big difference. Propiconazole absolutely works for blast on rice, or it might have been rust. I don't remember which one it was. There's boatloads of pictures. Again, just Google it. Well, silica by itself made a pretty profound impact, and when you paired the two of them together, look at the magic, right? So it's not a pesticide. It's not killing anything. We are helping to increase and make that plant healthier. You know, I had a cousin who went to Mizzou, and again, I went to Iowa, so we got that little rivalry going on, but he and I are really close. And my cousin had a little too much fun in college, and he always used to explain it like this. He said, Kurt, he's like, you know, yeah, I might be out drinking a little too hard. He goes, but you know, when you, and you guys are, you'll appreciate this analogy. He's like, you know, back when the wolves would hunt the buffalo, did they go and they kill the healthiest, biggest, strongest badass in the group? No. They go after the weak link, the weakest link, right? That's the one that the wolves would go eat, and they're like culling the herd, and in some ways it makes that herd stronger. And he's like, that's all I'm doing with my brain cells. Every time I go drink too much, I'm getting smarter. Like, I don't know about that. He's a higher up for like UBS now, okay? So, but my point is this. If we can make that plant a little bit healthier, and put yourself in the pathogen shoes. You're going to go attack a real healthy plant, you're going to go attack one that's already struggling. Right? It's like our immune system. When we get run down and we get tired, when I'm on the road way too much, I'm eating crappy road food. God, ADHD side. The other night, I was coming home from a meeting that I did in Kentucky, and I missed the stops where I could have had food. Ended up eating gas station chicken tenders. Blah, right? Like, I was not in like peak optimum performance after that, okay? So healthier plants can fight off disease better. That's where we're going with this, right? So I have guys that have used the Pixie Dust Plus product on spring wheat and on Kentucky bluegrass, and they are running less fungicide passes. Not because it is a pesticide, and I don't even know if that's relevant for you guys if you're running any pesticide at all, but it's like a $9 an acre application instead of a $20 application. So they're like, hey, we can actually save money just up front and have healthier, better looking plants from the get-go. So that's of interest to them. Don't know if it is for you or not. Like I told you, I'm a little bit of a mad scientist, and we have, I'm right on time. So I'm wrap this up in less than 1 minute. I like experimenting and solving local problems. Because I have ADHD, this is why I went and helped with the medical cannabis thing at all. I got bored with corn and soybeans. I love that I get to travel all over. And if you have a problem that is not on, like every one of you has a problem that is like probably some 40 acres somewhere that the co-op doesn't care about, and it keeps you up at night because you're like, I wish I could solve this one little problem. And it's not gonna be on big acres. And so again, the co-op doesn't want it, right? The universities aren't gonna study it. Those are the acres I want. I want to know what's your problem, because that's what drives me. That's what's fun for me, is solving problems. And Brooks asked me this morning, he's like, are you not like excited about like the biogel? He's like, why do you keep talking about BioCal all the time? And I said, Brooks, because the issue is in the Midwest, right? We always have waterlogged soils, and I haven't figured that out yet. Like biogel working is so much of like a foregone conclusion for me. I'm like, it'll absolutely work here, right? Like maybe not in Iowa where we have those heavy soils. Biogel, without a doubt, Hydroprime, without a doubt, will work here. Like they're so confident in it, they got a money back guarantee on it. So I don't want to say I don't care about that, but it's like, yeah, that's solved. Check, it's done. For me, I'm like, how are we going to solve these stupid waterlogged soils? It's just pissing me off that I can't figure it out. And I finally came up with an idea on this because I just refuse to be bested by a problem. So if you have a problem, whatever that may be, come talk to me about it, because I like solving interesting problems. Last year, I created a product called Protein Shake, completely and totally experimental. And guys, I do not charge for experimental products. If you are using our products, so it's free for customers and dealers. So if you're working with Cody and you're working with MBA, I give this stuff away for free, right, for data, because I want to all learn together. And I built this product last year because Travis Messer, who I've worked with for years, came to me and he's like, hey, do you think we could bump protein in wheat? So I built something that was amino acid based, because I'm only going to base it on what I can support scientifically. And I built this product, and our total variability in yield we did this across 5 states. I got +1 bushels to -1 bushels. That was the total yield variation. I'm like, well, that was kind of frustrating, but it's called Protein Shake, because what did Travis want? He wanted a protein bump. You know what we did to protein across those 5 states? Well, anywhere we got data anyway. I increased protein by almost a point. 0.8 of a point was the increase on protein. When we pay attention to the specific amino acid on the specific crop at the specific time, we can actually do some pretty cool stuff. So the new one, that was the analysis on it. The one that I'm working on this year, we're calling Scuba Tank, right? Because the water, right? I can't help myself, right? We'll do the rebrand on the pixie dust. Y'all are going to deal with it on some of this other stuff. That's all there is to it, okay? This is an experimental amino acid for waterlogging specifically, because there's alanine in there. I don't always give my full formulation, so I'm not going to now, but I'll tell you, alanine is a very critically important amino acid for waterlogging. So if anybody wants to play with this early, and you're like, we don't have water problems, I just told you that you do. But I wouldn't put this on everywhere. I wouldn't put this in zone 5, okay, your best zones. I'd put this in zone 1, those high CECs where we have issues. That's where I would try it. Because guys, agronomy needs to be regionally based, right? Not here versus Florida versus the Midwest, but even more so than that, it needs to be very local. And we need to figure out what works on which acres. And I'm sorry, but no matter who you're working with, and I don't care if, again, it's Neil or MBA or anybody, if the very first question out of your mouth to any single person who's trying to sell you anything on your farm should be this: where will your product not work? And if they can't tell you which of your acres that you should not put that product on, then you don't have a sales agronomist, a technical agronomist, a consulting agronomist. You have a walking, talking, breathing, living sales brochure. You know, my definition of snake oil is any product that works equally well everywhere all the time. Sounds an awful lot like MAP and DAP, doesn't it? Yeah, that's fun. Some of you will get that later tonight. You're going to be like, oh, that's funny. Okay, so anyway, that's it. Like I said, if you want to work, you got interesting problems to solve, happy to help you on that. Hey, guess what? We did 120 slides and I was only 4 minutes over. So thank you for your time. Happy to take whatever questions you have.